Hello and welcome to a conversation with Pommy. Pommy, we are back, mate. This is where it really all began. You and I just trying to sell the dream in off season. I think I'm finally ready to start moving on and talking about what's going to happen moving forward. What's going on with you? Where's your head at?
Hey, I'm good. I mean, I'm a veteran like you of this time of year. So, I mean, everyone knows this is the real grand final off season. Like the September's just a dream, but everyone knows it's really all about trade and draft time. That is the pinnacle of sports entertainment.
Yes, it's true. It's Carlton's grand final, unfortunately, is just it starts in October. It's quite disappointing, but it's the time when we have the most hope because it's all about the what ifs. Maybe one day we'll be celebrating what is as opposed to what could be, but for now, we're still in the what ifs. And I wanted to just catch up with you, start the conversation series again that we always do in the off season, and just kind of recap what's going on. I think for the most part, at the moment, obviously the list changes is probably at the top of the list of things to talk about. What have you made of the list changes so far?
To be honest, I don't really hate them. I might be in the minority, though, because there is a player I'm sure we'll talk about at length who's a fan favourite. But when I look at what Austin's got to do, I think if I was Nick Austin, I would be looking at this list and saying they kind of had to work very hard with the injuries they had. They were very fortunate that when a player got injured who replaced an injured player, the other injured player just happened to be fit. So it was like a conveyor belt of injuries in the same area of the field as well. And I imagine Nick is happy with the resilience of the group, but I would say he would be looking at this and making decisions of, we're ninth now, fourth has got to be the agenda, right, next year. So how do I get the B graders into more of a B plus, A negative? And when you've got 5 players in the All-Australian, like Geelong, same amount of players in the All-Australian 44, you've got to look at them 8 gaps. And I'd say them 8 gaps, if Nick Austin was here, is probably from the guys that are propping them up and working with them. He's got the A graders, he's got the elite talent. It's getting them players around him and probably making some harsh list calls to bring them in.
Yeah. I think, and I know we say this all the time because we're pretty optimistic, but I think this year, genuinely, I think watching the finals, this year's the first year where I've watched them and I thought to myself, for the most part, we can match it with these games. The games that I'm watching, maybe apart from like the Geelong-Collingwood game last week, I genuinely sat there and I thought to myself, yeah, we're good enough to match it here. We could actually cause some damage. And I genuinely believe at this time of year. And then, I think when you couple that with the All-Australians that we have, the top line talent that we know we have, I think Charlie being back into the mix adds that other A grader, which we knew was there, but we weren't sure if he was going to be able to reach those heights again. Well, everyone was unsure except you. So that's where I've got the confidence of, okay, whatever is going to happen over the next 4 to 5 years, this is the group. This is the list. I'm not really sure about if we're going to be having conversations around big fish or big superstar players coming to the club. I think we're past that now. I think this is the list. These are the stars that we have, and really it is about filling the rest. Then there's the other part around, we've lost a couple of serviceable players. Obviously, Stock is the one that has created a lot of discussion because he was, a young player, 22, neither here nor there, not a midfielder, not a defender, sort of stuck in this grey area. And I think this is the first time in a long time that I can remember there being a delisting that has really made us feel like, oh, he's a little bit stiff. And that's a really bold call. And let's be honest, we've been asking for bold calls from the club for a long time.
You've nailed it. Do you know what I mean? I think with Stocker, we all like him. And I think if Stocker probably didn't have the public profile that he did, it would probably be a different conversation. And I think the fans would accept it. But I think when you look at the position he's playing, we can't judge him as a midfielder. He's been deployed almost exclusively in that general defender area. And you look at Carlton's list, that is probably where we have a plethora of players. Like, we've got them coming out of our ears. That's one place probably we can have an injury at the moment, and there's a dozen players that can fulfill that role. When you look at what he did in the VFL, you do see a noticeable drop in the fourth quarter from him, which suits the engine mandate. Then you look and you think, he's a primary ball user there. Are you dropping Doherty? Are you dropping Sard? Are you dropping Williams? Are you dropping Newman? You're probably not. So I admire Austin then when I look at the midfield and the insiders where he was drafted as. If we're honest, he's probably 2 years now behind the 8 ball to even break into that. And that is a young midfield as well. So probably Nick Austin has been very fair at the trade table, much to my chagrin, that he bids on these uncontracted players. And I'm like, stop doing that, rip teams off. He's probably mirrored his logic with Stocker, and Stocker's a lot easier to find himself on a list without having to trade for him. And if Carlton kept him on the list, it would have been a sad Chera type conversation where a club would have to give something up. And if I was a list manager, Stocker ain't going to be a third or a fourth. He's an unknown. I might look to the draft, but now he's free and it's just a phone call away. Probably the best opportunity. So I commend Austin really for his fairness in that deal, because Stocker's got the best chance capable now of finding his way back into an AFL list.
I think for me, obviously, I was pretty shocked by it. I have my own personal attachment to Stock because of the way he plays. They've got that hard edge, and you have that spirit and that soul. And then when I thought about it a little bit further, I thought, well, if we knew we weren't going to be moving forward with him, why did we play him in those final 2 games? Like, why did we, not just play Brody Kemp, for example? So, because what it's telling me was that he was good enough to play in those last 2 games where obviously finals was on the line, and that's a big game for the club. But it's now been decided that, actually, we don't want to move forward with him. I was just more or less taken aback by the lack of faith in what he could become. And again, that's just from this side. I'm sure they've got a lot more information on the inside that we don't. And there's a lot more that goes into a player's spot on the list. There's cultural fits. There's all sorts of things. And at the moment, a lot of it's speculative. But, when it does come down to where is he in the pecking order of the midfield, where is he in the pecking order of the defense, I understand where you're coming from.
Stocker's one of them players that at the moment Carlton traditionally hold on to. So we hold on to them and we hope of what ifs. But unfortunately, the AFL, there's only so much room for a what if. And the chances are, if he hasn't done it by year 4, he probably ain't going to go here. He's linked with Essendon and North. Makes sense. They can afford to play a young midfielder and take a chance like we did in 2017 and 18 with Dow, and keep playing him and SPS. That they can afford to. Now Carlton are a flag side. That's where they've got to get their mindset in. So if you've got your 7th, 8th best player in that role there, and he's 4 years in, an 18-year-old could probably still slot into being the 7th, 8th best player with upside and learn from these players from the right age. I think Stocker really, if we're honest, is impossible probably for him to break into this side, because as harsh as it sounds, toughness doesn't win you games. It's toughness with output, and he's just physically tough. But I can take you back to Glasgow and find a lot of guys that are tough. I won't want them on the football field, though.
The other part is, I remember, I think it might have been Brad Lloyd, or maybe it was Austin, who made mention of the fact that we're going to go to the draft this year. But when you look at those changes, I don't know. I feel like there's room for some wheeling and dealing here.
Well, I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, Carlton look, I think if I was Nick Austin, I'd be looking at, and people will talk about the second half of the year massively. They'll talk about it, and rightly so. From 8-2 to 9th is quite a drop, but there's a lot of positives if I was Nick Austin to take out of that. I mean, I think the biggest one for Nick Austin, and probably where it's not really talked about by the media, not really talked about by Carlton fans as well, but they'll look at the back half, particularly when with the defence. Carlton, in them glory years, 8-2, we were the 4th. That they were the top 10 hardest sides, 5th for points scored against, 5th hardest to score against organically. But the back end, they actually improved on that and became the fourth hardest team in the league in that period, even though we didn't have the results. It was our efficiency at scoring that started to fall away. So I think for Austin, he'll be like, well, you know what? We're very tough to score against. Where else is it? And then he'll look at probably Lee Matthews calling us fraudulent a year ago, saying how a Carlton a shit contested side. Their entire list is contested players. And now we're the top 2 ranked side in the comp. And we sustained that even through the bad times. So it's a little bit more intricate than that. And I think Nick Austin will look and go, okay, what is it? And it's probably the ball use and the application in pressure games. And you've got to think the first half of the season is the most pointless part of the season. It's just basically everyone turning up to work in a Mercedes or something. But the second half is they actually show you if they can work or not. And that's where Carlton fell off. So if I'm Austin, I'm looking at draft profile of players. Kicking efficiency is going to be high up. Good kicking skills. Because under pressure, if that drops by 50%, if they're naturally good at it, brilliant. And Carlton have a lot of players on the list that weren't good kicks as kids. They were average. So it's roughly easy to work out. If they were average when they're under no pressure, under pressure, they're probably going to fall below. So I think it's real interesting for Austin. He's got to make some tough calls because I would say, looking at this list, in my opinion, with 3 players different to Geelong, definitely 3 players minimum. And that's his now call of, can I identify these kids? Can I get them? Because I genuinely think the game plan and everything is fine. It's the application and the numbers back that up. The eye test backs that up. It's that little 10% that he needs to change. So over to Nick now to work his magic.
Yeah, I remember, I mean, there were a lot of holes last year. I remember the start of the year, the wing position was a big unknown. We seem to have I feel like we've taken a step forward in that regard. I don't know if it's the finished product yet. It might be. You know, O'Brien and Cottrell have earned themselves new deals, which is, you know, fantastic for them. The one thing that's been constant throughout, well, it's been constant for many years, but it's that entry kick inside 50. And I'm stuck between thinking about, is it just our game plan to get that ball in nice and deep for Charlie and Harry? Or when I watch the great sides, when I'm watching the finals football right now, and I'm watching, you know, we're going to be coming up to, you know, prelims and grand finals, these elite teams are able to find leads at the football, shorter kicks. We resort to the long kick, it seems. And I'm not sure if it's what we're being instructed to do or if it's just the pressure kicks in and we just bomb the ball long. So that's why I'm thinking, what do we do about that half forward player? Because we've rotated a few. We've had sort of Fogarty's come through that fold. Fisher's played that role. Jack Martin, when he's fit, that's him. Jack Silvani's played that role, but then he's had to play a bit more ruck. And that's where I'm thinking, is that one of the next holes for us on the list?
100%. And I think when you look at Carlton as well, it's really ingrained into them that when they do struggle and when it's getting a bit harder and teams rushes, that long kick starts to come back more. The running and the leading into space probably kills Carlton more than any other side. It's their ability to spread from a contest. We naturally kind of help each other out. And you do see O'Brien's very guilty of this before he was dropped and came back a little bit better, of going to help and becoming more central, which then gives Carlton zero options other than the long kick. There's no one in space. So I think Nick Austin will probably be looking. I won't be surprised to see him bring in another couple of wingers and go, look, you know what? I probably need the competition here. I've got a lot of inside midfielders and a lot of players that are pretend wingers like Setterfield, Carroll's another one as well. That what is he? Is he an insider? Is he an outsider? Probably wants 2 more full-time wingers on there to keep Cottrell honest, but also keep O'Brien honest and put a bit of pressure on him. And the high half forward, that's one of them wonderful myths because you've got Jesus, who was Carlton's best inside 50 to chance creation 2 years ago. Jettison now as a ruck, so you miss that. Jack Martin couldn't quite get fit, but then he did do what Jack Martin does, doesn't he? You give up on him. He has a brilliant game and you kind of return to love him. So I would say if I was Austin, that would be high up. If I do take pick 10 in the draft, I would be between someone who can play that high half forward role and maybe float back, or am I looking at like an Ollie Hollands and saying, look, you know what, this guy's the best two-way runner in the draft, very creative, very attacking. He's Cottrell clone, but probably has a higher ceiling. A lot of questions for Nick there to really grit his teeth into, and pick 10, I think, is probably the best pick in the draft for what Carlton need.
Yeah. But if we're winning, if we're aiming for top 4 and we're in the premiership window now, these holes on our list, I feel like there are players out there in the market that we, at a reasonable price, that we'd be able to go after and fill those needs. With obviously, you go to the draft, you look to the future, and you have to do that. I totally understand that, but I just think there has to be opportunities out there for these holes.
Well, I mean, there does. I mean, I think when Austin will look at it from a statistical point of view, we were 11th from goals if you take in your forward half, if you take away your keys. I think Austin will look at when Motlop came into the side, Carlton massively jettisoned in there. So I would say that's a makeup issue. I think prior to Motlop coming in, Durden and Owies were almost becoming the same player, where top sides genuinely play one type of Owies. Look at the Eagle side in the mid-noughties. Jamie Cripps was the defensive guy, 2 little whippersnippers around him looking to change the game. That's genuinely the makeup, and Motlop probably is the most skillful small forward Carlton have got. His defensive numbers are great. So I would say that you can draft these players. The wonderful thing about your smalls is they litter the AFL draft. So, and genuinely look at them. Ginnivan, rookie pick. You know what I mean? You look at Mia's pick 60 odd. These guys genuinely have got a high success rate very late on. It's your established roles, your inside midfielders and your key position players you need to take early. So that's an advantage. I hear what you're saying about maturity. I mean, might be something that Nick looks at and says, you know what, maybe let's bite the bullet. Let's look at other great dynasties in other world sports where experience was literally learnt the hard way by creating a culture and an ethos around a young core group. And he might say something like Bailey Humphries, you know what, superstar. You know what, I'm going to trust Jack Martin to stay fit for a whole year. I'm going to trust Pitternet not to need JSOS and keep him in his best position, high half forward. I'm maybe going to float more players through there. We saw that mid-year with Cottrell when he came on as a sub and he went at high half forward. He looked a lot more damaging. Zach Fisher looked damaging in that position. So he might think, you know what, Lightning probably won't strike twice. Carlton's injuries this year, not using it as an excuse because it's not. They're a squad and they have to deal with it. But it was catastrophic in them certain areas you're talking about, which was very hard. I'd imagine. I don't think Voss will have thought, fuck, halfway through the year, I'm going to have to draft Will Hayes. That won't have been in his mindset. That was a last-minute plan. I don't think he would have thought Lewis Young would start. He would have probably said Oscar McDonald and Jacob are my key defenders. So he's had to roll with the punches, and he's got lucky sometimes. But I thought, if I was Nick Austin, I learned a lot about this list this year, and I probably wouldn't have learned it if they weren't fit, if they were all fit. He probably learned very early on, shit, our second 22 needs to be better.
Yeah, absolutely. Have you got your eye on anyone else in the league from a mature player standpoint?
I think Blake Acres is probably the biggest no-brainer that Carlton will ever have, to be honest. I mean, the price as well is brilliant. 350K is the top figure that's been expected. So, I mean, that's nothing. You look at Blake Acres, he's basically Jack Noons, which we saw how much Voss liked him. I know the fans hated him, but there's an obvious role for a defensive winger. And I don't think O'Brien's a defensive winger, and I don't think Matty Cottrell's a defensive winger. And that's his specialisation. He comes from a high kicking game, a high possession retention game. You saw what Ed Langdon did when he moved and got a bit more creative freedom. I'd argue Blake Acres will look at Carlton's method and go, Jesus, this is good. And Blake Acres' story as well is Carlton was the steak knives in a deal. Fremantle weren't really ensconced by him. They told him the only way you can play is if you learn to be a winger. He knuckled down and has owned that spot. So he knows hard work, he knows graft, he knows how fortunate he is. I think he's a great culture player for the boys to show that second opportunities, you don't take them for granted. And I think he slots straight in. He'll be there round one. Other than that, I think Carlton probably trying to look at a small forward or someone in that avenue that could help them out. Probably someone who's a bit more mature and older than now. And I think that's going to be hard for Carlton if they do that, if they try and find that player. Because at the moment, everyone's been re-signed. Bruce was linked, players like that. So clubs are going to be wanting to keep them middle-aged players as well.
Yeah. I'm thinking, where would you go to get these players? Because the conversation I have with myself about it is I would love to get not too many, but maybe one or two former premiership players. I've mentioned Jamie Cripps a couple of times. These types, just not that I expect someone like a Jamie Cripps to come to the club and then kick X amount of goals, but just guys that can. I think our forward line needs somebody in there who can organize things a little bit better than what we have right now. I'm not. I think it's a very talented forward line. I also think it's a very raw forward line, and that's where I've been thinking about who could we bring in from a almost like an on-field coach point of view, just to get everyone settled. I feel like we have it down back because we've got some mature guys down there, Doc, Sard, etc. And like a Wiedering's a pretty mature head in the way that he plays. The midfield, I think it definitely got better. I think when we added George Hewitt, Cripps is now a real veteran of this league, but I'm just not sure we have that in the forward line yet. Now, do we need it? I don't know, but that's just where my mind goes to. I would love to have some more, I guess, just winning / premiership experience on the list.
Well, I think you nail it. I think when you look at the back end of the year as well, Carlton's forward line, you've got Motlop, 19 years old. Do you know what I mean? He's a baby himself. Matty O is, although he's 26 and he's cracking on a bit, got to remember he's a late comer to the AFL. So he's essentially like a second, third year player in reality. And then, Durden as well fits the bill, 21 years old. Again, though, he's a very inexperienced player. And I don't look at Harry and Charlie and they scream leader. To me, I think they're very inspirational, but I don't think they're the type of players that are going to pull you to one side and say, look, this is what I need you to do and this is what we do. Because I think both of them are very wet behind the ears, particularly Kerner. And I wouldn't want them having the responsibility either. I think both of them have had one very, very good year. Let's see 2, let's see 3, let's see 4. And I think they're capable of it, but I'd be looking at that. So I see what you're saying. Jamie Cripps fits the bill. And then you've got players, that probably aren't as sexy. People like Robbie Fox, who's been retrained as a backman at Sydney, but he's mature and he's been in and around the leadership group at VFL level. And then, there's one player that no one's talked about, and I think he is the best small forward in the game. And he's on a very limited deal. And with Hawthorn re-signing players, Dylan Moore screams to me everything I want in a small forward. And he's on that limited deal as well. The only problem is I know he's a manic Hawks fan, and I think he'd be hard to get. But I think if I look at Hawthorn, that would probably be somewhere I go. But if you can't get the right player, don't get any player, is my mantra. And you've got to remember, these boys are really young in that forward half of the ground. And I expect probably Motlop and Durden to usurp Owies this year. And I think that's probably something Voss will do. So I wouldn't mind them bringing in a young, crafty kid if there is one there, if they can't get the right mature age player.
Yeah. Just on Harry and Charlie, I mean, I agree with you. Like, I don't look at them right now as those cool heads, those leaders yet. Is this just part of the ride? And we just have to kind of wait until they mature a little bit more than what they have now, and they get more serious, or they get more, I guess, they get a greater level of having that cool head on the ground. And I think it has to be that way because you invest heavily in them. They're the future of the club. They're the present of the club. I guess I'm just wanting for somebody on the list, on the field, to be able to pull them up when need be and help direct them, because I think even they have moments where they've made mistakes in certain moments. is that just something you bring in from another club on a short-term deal, or is that just something you just ride out and you hope that the development coaches that we have throughout the week can train them and they'll just, naturally improve because every year in the system, you would assume you become a better version of yourself the year before.
I think that's what Austin will be thinking. I think he'll be thinking if it's the right player, go for it. But I don't think Austin's going to be the type of list manager, maybe like Sauce, who would go, shit, I need a 30-year-old. I'll just get any 30-year-old that's available.
Mm,
I think Austin will have one mind in saying, well, you know what? We've come to ninth with this list. It's not a big gap. You're talking, 3 points would have got us in the 8.
yeah,
Everything is fixable and on us. We haven't lost by fortune. We've lost by our own undoing, which I always think in a development capacity is exciting when you can say it's your fault because it
yeah,
means you can reverse it.
yeah.
And I think he'll look at probably Jesse Motlop and go, you know what, Jesse Motlop, when he first came in, there was a lot of question marks about him, but he massively adapted to the game plan, massively improved. And towards the end, I would say, if I'm honest, Nick, he was probably the first name on the team sheet when it came after Harry and Charlie. I think he would have gone Harry, Charlie, Motlop. Motlop's my boy. And I think that's something that you look at the other clubs, small forwards genuinely hit the ground running anyway. And
That's true.
it's easy. You've got the best 2 forwards in the game.
It's a good point. We did get some significant game time into those small forwards. Like Durden played 19 games. Jesse played over 10. It might have been 12.
Yeah, 12.
12, yeah. So that I think is a big tick. And I don't have as much, personal responsibility put on them just yet because they're still very, very raw. So, by the time the moment in which they get to that point in their career where they're reliable, I think is going to be a shorter amount of time compared to some of these other players that we bring in.
Mate, spot on. And I think that people are talking about the high half forward position. When you look at Zach Fisher's game time there, that was brilliant when he was deployed in that higher role, because I don't think Zach Fisher's quite a midfielder, but I also don't think he's a small forward. But I think that high half forward position, when Carlton were playing really well as well, and the game plan was being spread and the ball was being moved with a bit of zip, Zach Fisher looked like that was what Carlton have lacked for many years. So then you'd look at it and you'd say the only thing that forward line lacks is a third tall or someone that can be that third presenter. Jack Martin does that job beautifully, but it's few and far between. Jesus is tremendous at it. And I'd like to see Jesus get the other thing. And as for leadership, I wouldn't be surprised Ed Kerno to take that mantle in the forward line. We know Teague started to redevelop him in that role, started with Bolton as well. We know it's a role that Ed himself has said he fully embraces and he really gets excited about it. And that might be something that if I'm Voss, I say, well, you know what? Let's put Ed Kerno instead of Owies. Let's put him in there, play him with 3 smalls who are excitable. He knows how to do the role. He's going to bring that tackle pressure, but he's going to be that level head and look to phase him out very quickly and use him intermittently in them pressure cooker games, like your Collingwoods, like your Richmonds, where you know these guys are going to be under the cosh. And all it needs is training. That's what people forget. You don't need to play on the ground with them.
Yeah.
Just being around them is huge. And that's something that Ed can really bring because it's just synergy they need. Them 3, I think, probably not always. He's probably one who's probably just the wrong side of 25 for me. I think Motlop will overtake him as a pressure defender very forward very quickly. I think that's where Carlton will look. If we can get 12, 15 games into these boys again, they'll be a lot better for it because you're starting to see them. They're starting to get that synergy, particularly Motlop and Durden. I really enjoyed that. Was one of my highlights the last 3 games. You could see they started to get that synergy of, right, I'm going to go here. You protect that area. And they started to understand how each other works. So I think that's exciting moving forward for the club.
My only thing with Ed in that role, I get what you're saying. My only thing is, at this point, I don't know if he's going to improve our ball use because I don't look at Ed as a guy that uses the ball particularly well. I look at him more as a guy that can get a lot of the ball, but I've never really viewed him as a really high level ball user. Now the numbers might say otherwise, but I'm just talking anecdotally. I think the other part about having someone in the forward line, which I've thought about as well, is we don't really deploy a defensive half forward. And we seem to have a lot of these half-back flankers this year and for many years that seem to really get off the leash. And that's where I'm thinking, okay, well, Ed could definitely do a forward tag on a Sinclair, on a Sicily, on a Brad Hill, these types, these runners, these, the Jordan Dawsons and the like. And that's something I don't think we've had. I think it could be deployed. I think any of these smalls could do it, but I think Eddie's definitely one that could do it. But the overall notion of a defensively minded forward, half forward or small forward for these flankers is something that I think about too.
Yeah, it's something that I could see Durden taking that role with a bit of experience. What I look at Ed's re-signing as is I look at it as a cheat on the soft cap.
Yeah.
That's how I look at it. I don't think he'll play more than 5 games for the club this year. I think it's cheating the soft cap. It's creating a culture that you want. Ed Kerner is the personification of getting every little bit of milk out of the teat we call talent. He has literally milked what God gave him. And I think that's a great example for Durden, for Motlop, of how I want them to be. They've got the talent. I want them to milk that talent, though, and go to the next level. I think Durden could do that role. He loves chasing people. We saw it. He never gave up. And there was a lot of times, much to the chagrin of our system, he'd end up at the back pocket because he's chased a guy. And that, for me, there is you've got to hone it in then, rein it in. And that's where Ed could teach him as his history as a tagger. You've got George Hewitt there as well, who could really refine him and go, look, we play a team game system, team defense, but this is the tips and the trade that I look to try and get him in a short amount of time. So I won't be surprised that Durden's got a big part to play. But I hear what you're saying. I think we need experience, but I think they've got a lot of experience. Their small forwards are probably the most guilty in the last 3 games of costing us football matches. Hate to pick on Durden, but 2 of them kicks inside 50. If he had them again, he wouldn't do it. It'll beat him up. And good. I hope it beats him up because he won't do it again and he'll learn. And that comes with game management. He panicked in that situation. Motlop did it a few times. Owies did it a few times. Kerno did it a lot of times. That's game management. These guys aren't used to being in that situation where a mistake costs you a game. Usually it just adds to the game. So I'm excited that another year in these boys. I don't think it's a huge priority to me, though. I'd rather count and get some wingers in. Get a bit of halfback, key defender type players. Get another key forward because we've only got 2. That is the one that scares the shit out of me when I look at this list. Harry or Charlie, and both of them have had history complaints. We were lucky they were pretty much the full game apart from a couple. That is what worries me. If I was Austin, I'd be like, Jesus, if that defense injuries we had was on the forward line, Jesus, we would have been foo-bad. And
Correct.
that is where I think Austin's biggest priority will be this draft time.
That's where I'm down for like pick 10, go get the best forward if he's available there. But it also just makes me think about, I think the other player who we got significant game time into at the early part of his career was Tom de Koning. And the conversation around Tom is generally centered around, is he a full-time ruck? Is he a part ruck forward? And then I'm thinking, do we need to get one more ruck on the list, like just a body? And the name that springs to mind in this moment right now is Lloyd Meek, because he's a little bit experienced, started playing some game time for Freo. Jackson's seemingly going to go to Freo. There might be an opportunity there. And I feel like we were one ruck short on the list. I know we had Murkov on the list, but I don't really know if he was genuinely going to ever play. And he didn't play. He got injured a few times throughout the year, but I don't know. Do we trust that Murkov might be ready for some game time next year? Do we bring another ruck onto the list as just a senior body? Or do we have faith that Tom de Koning is going to develop a little bit more next year? Because he had a pretty big leap, I thought, this year in his development. Do we trust that he's going to be able to impact more and kick 15 to 20 goals next year when he's forward?
I think Murkoff, I just don't count him on the list. I think he's still very wet behind the ears. So I think if we count keeping him on, I would say that they've just got to view him as the slow burn. And as proved by Voss, when we started having ruck injuries, Jesus became a ruck. So I think that says everything, that Voss is doing the right thing there. Don't bring him in till he's ready, because it's a confidence-based role.
Yeah.
Lloyd Meek fits the bill. For me, I would have liked to have seen Carlton have a sniff at someone old, like a Goldstein, who now has re-signed, but someone like that who I can say, you know what, he doesn't have to play. Just have him there so they can
Yes.
train with him on the track every day and understand the elite levels it's taken. Wouldn't be against it, to be honest. I mean, if I was Nick Austin, I'd be looking at the modern day forwards we're starting to see come through the draft. Isaac Keeler, a guy that I'm in love with. They're all forward rucks. So, like Jackson, guys that do play forward a lot of time, but also have a bit of ruck craft. So that might be something to go back to your high half forward question. That is where a lot of players use as conduits. Luke Jackson is used as a conduit a lot at high half forward, particularly in his first couple of years before he started to really get the body. So again, that might be a question for Austin of going, well, you know what? Why don't I go for Isaac Keeler? I can play him at high half forward. He's very good at marking. He's very crafty on the deck, but also Pitternet, when he's fit, can ruck all day. TDK's proved that all day. Another pre-season behind him. I can maybe rob Peter to pay Paul. We saw Lewis Young start to pinch hit in the ruck. Harry's done it. And go, well, you know what? Maybe I can get these people around the ground, because at the moment he doesn't have someone like that. So is that a Brody Kemp who plays at half forward, which allows him to then take someone out of the forward line to do a few bits of pinch hitting? A lot of questions for Nick Austin there, because obviously if you get Isaac Keeler at pick 10, you can't get other players and fill other holes. So it's a proper game of chess this year, and this is why it's exciting. Fans watching at home, this window here, gone good or bad, will win as a flag or cost as a flag. That is how serious it is, and it'll happen very quickly if he nails it. It could fuck us if it goes wrong. So that's why it's exciting, and I bet Austin cannot wait to put his stamp on the list.
Yeah.
He'll put his stamp on the list this window.
Well, the other part to this whole equation is this time of year, the word destination club starts rearing its head. When you really think of it, if you're a player that's not playing in a Victorian team, and there's a lot of players that probably do want to come and play for the big Melbourne sides, we are definitely one of them, no doubt about that. There is no doubt that we are ready to take the next step. I mean, I know that we're Carlton supporters and we're always going to have that optimism, but there's no doubt in my mind that if you're a player that wants more opportunity or that wants to be a part of a big Melbourne club and you want to be a part of a team just about to start their rise, I think we are right up there, top 2 or 3 sides in the competition for that situation that will actually attract players, and we can actually leverage that. I remember you and I sitting here, I think it was it 2018? And, we're just trying to manifest a destination club, but we were so far behind. Whereas now we're, but for 90 seconds, we're in the 8. That's how close we are to really contending. So that's the other part that I'm genuinely optimistic about as well. I think we definitely have the leverage in being a place that people will want to come to play with Paddy Cripps, to play with Sam Walsh, to be coached by Michael Voss. I think we have that appeal now.
I think Blake Acres proves it.
Yeah.
At that price. How often we hear this at this time of year? Oh, Zach Williams wants to come to Carlton. He's going to turn down GWS. And you're like, yes, fucking hell, they're a top 8 side. He's a good player. He wants $1 million a year, though. And you're like, oh, for fuck's sake. And to hear Blake Acres wants to come to Carlton, oh, he's only taking $350K. I'm like, shit, that's probably about under his money, if anything. Like, I would have happily played 400, 450 to fit the hole. So I think that proves it now. If I'm a player, I'm looking at Carlton and saying, what do they need? And the small forwards, to answer your question, they're 11th at the moment. If I'm a 26, like I hate to say his name on this show, Tom Papley. If I'm a Tom Papley, yes, Sydney are very good. But if I suddenly wanted to move to Victoria, I would go, right, okay, Carlton are selling me the dream. They sold me the dream when they were 18th. And they said that I could get them into the 8. Okay, 90 seconds away from the 8. I can kick 20, 30 goals a year. So I've got them in the 8. But then he's also starting to think, playing with Jesse Motlop, Harry Mackay, Kerner, you know what? Maybe I could kick 40. Maybe I could create 10 as well. Shit, I can take these guys to the flag. And suddenly now, we used to say this in 2018, Sauce has got to sell the dream. Sticks Kernahan, Diesel Williams, all them legends, Carlton Football Club, bottom of the pile, but you could be the one. Now we can say, you know what? We already have the players that can get us back to the promised land. We think you're the X factor, though. And suddenly players are going to be saying, fuck, I don't mind a bit of Carlton. I reckon Cornelio is on his yacht at the moment going, I took Gillian's drug and blood money, but fuck, I wish I was there. Wish I was playing. I wish I was George Hewitt for them. Wish I was George Hewitt playing with that mob.
Might be ready to put a shirt on and come to Carlton.
I'll forgive him if he comes. If he comes, I'll forgive him. But no, I think that's something that, like you say, for sellability, I think if I will know a lot about Nick Austin. I expect in the first couple of days of the window this Blake Acres to be done. And I want Carlton to be like Arsenal in the EPL. Get the business done. First 24 hours. And then I predict they're probably going to mess about with pick 10, maybe some back-end picks, try and move up in the draft. I would guarantee Carlton will have 2 picks in the top 30. If I'm Austin, I'm thinking if I can get 2, I can complete this list. So maybe a future first, maybe used, and him go, next year, there's a lot of wide players in them later picks. So I probably don't need a first. Maybe I take a punt, take the future first away, go in. And I think for Nick Austin, that's going to be really exciting for him because he can sit back, say trade the future first very early, and then go, right, we always have some idiot who decides they want to move to Melbourne 48 hours before. How often does that happen? We're always linked to them. Some guy last minute's having a haircut and goes, Victoria's all right, it might go there. If he's got his business done, he can be like, right, we're the dickheads now. You need to sell him. We can offer a little bit unders, be a bit creative, help you out. And because he's got that good reputation, Nick, it's probably going to help someone else. So that's what I'm hoping that. I wouldn't be surprised that we do this in a month's time and there's a huge shock. I reckon there's a huge shock around the corner because no good players are leaving. Hopper and Taranto, but they're Mickey Mouse players, let's be honest.
Yeah,
proper footballers, I can see. I reckon Carlton are in for a little twist. And I think we're going to be in a good position to play twist with the AFL.
Yeah. I mean, it's dangerous to compare to other clubs in their journeys. And I'm guilty of it. I do it all the time, the Melbourne and the Richmond journey. But Richmond in particular, I remember that one-off season. I think it was Nank, Lambert, might have been Jaden Short in the one off season. But they were rookies. And I remember they really set them up. And that's what I'm hoping for. And listen, if there's one thing that Austin's been able to prove, it's only been one full off season, I guess. But what he was able to bring in last year, both from a talent perspective and a cost perspective, I think if you can replicate it again this year, we're laughing.
I think the 2016 off-season comparison is brilliant as well. Do you know what I mean? Is brilliant with Carlton. I think you look at that, it set them up. They had that massive punter, Prestia. They got him in. He was probably the final cog of that midfield. Carlton's final cog of their midfield is probably an elite wing or someone that can take the game to the next level. And then probably fitting players. And that's what they did. They fit players in that draft around what they were trying to build. Bolton, players like that. Do you know what I mean? They really looked at that draft and said, this is where we are as a football club. And they brought in Graham, Jaden Short came in off their rookie list. Nank and Caddy really fitted that ruck. And ironically, Caddy was probably what Carlton needs, someone who can play a lot of roles very quickly at AFL standard. So I'm with you. I think Nick Austin will be looking and going, well, you know what? I probably need one real big cog in this system. And I think we are like Richmond 2016. We've got the personnel. You look at their superstar side in 2017, it was all there, really. Do you know what I mean? And it was just complemented again by them guys surrounding them got a little bit better. Prestia came in, allowing Dustin Martin to get lots of easier ball. So things like that for Carlton is huge. We look at Cripps, early season Cripps. How good was he when that midfield was fully fit? Yeah. You'll probably get more of that back because that was affected by the injuries. I think Austin will be looking and thinking, all I need is handful of players here, and the promised land is there. And I wouldn't be surprised, bold call, September the 10th. Wouldn't be surprised to see Carlton go deep into finals if they nail this trade period. I'm talking deep, like deep.
Flagville, baby.
Flagville, baby. Get excited. Honestly, this list is so close. So close. It's a fleas dangly bit. That's what's separating us. And I think Nick Austin's going to surprise us this year. And I think he's going to really finish this list and finish the work Sauce did. He's got a lot of shit to get rid of, though. To be fair to Sauce, did well in some places, but he got a lot of crap on the list. And I think that is now Will Setterfield. That says to me, Carlton are looking at a midfielder when they've said, he's been offered a contract after the trade. Makes me a little bit excited that Austin's probably thinking, you know what, if I can get an elite kicking mid. Suddenly the wings opened up. Chera and Walsh were floating through there. We become a normal team. We float some guy there in a rest. I think something's cooking. I think Austin's doing something, and he's not like Sauce. He doesn't like the media does, old Nick. So he doesn't let us have much.
Yep. Well, we're right behind him, and we hope that he goes well. This has been a good chat, mate. We will definitely do this again.